Have you ever zoomed in on a place from your past only to wish you hadn't? It starts innocently enough, late-night boredom, the hum of my computer filling the quiet apartment, a half-empty cup of coffee growing cold beside me. I was scrolling aimlessly through Google Maps, jumping from one street to another, revisiting the corners of my childhood. The small suburban roads that once felt so safe. It's the kind of thing you do when sleep feels too far away, when nostalgia wraps around you like a warm, familiar blanket. But some nights, curiosity becomes a trap. I was tracing the path to my old house, the one I grew up in, remembering how the sun used to hit the porch just right, how the front yard smelled of grass and soil after rain. Everything looked normal, pixel-perfect in that digital world. And then I noticed a street I could swear hadn't been there before. Or at least it hadn't existed in my memory. It was narrow, twisting in ways that didn't make sense, lined with identical houses that shimmered in the faint digital glow of Street View. At first, I thought it was just new development. But something in the way the shadows moved or didn't move felt off. The night pressed closer around me. The only sounds the quiet clicks of my mouse and the distant hum of traffic outside my window. I leaned forward, zooming in, my heartbeat picking up pace. That's when I saw it. A figure standing outside my old house, so still it could have been a statue. But it wasn't. I froze, every instinct screaming that it shouldn't be there. The shape, the size, even the posture, it looked like me. Or rather, me as a child. The same unkempt hair, the small frame I hadn't carried in over a decade. My breath caught in my throat. If I close the tab, I'll never know the truth. But if I keep looking, something might notice me back. And the fear wasn't just of what I might see. It was the creeping, horrifying thought that I might already be seen. My fingers hovered over the mouse, trembling slightly, a mix of dread and morbid fascination rooting me to the spot. I told myself it had to be a glitch, a weird anomaly in the imagery, some trick of light and shadow. But deep down, I knew better. I kept zooming. The figure didn't move at first, but there was an undeniable awareness in the way it faced the camera, the digital eyes locking with mine across time and space. I felt a cold shiver race down my spine. That street shouldn't exist, that figure shouldn't exist, and yet, here it was. Couldn't look away. My childhood self, someone who should have been locked safely in the past, was standing outside my house, staring right at me or maybe through me. And in that moment, I realized that curiosity wasn't innocent tonight. It was a doorway, a warning, and whatever I saw on that street was only the beginning. Police car. I remember exactly why I opened Google Maps that night. It wasn't anything special, just one of those lonely evenings where boredom drapes over you like a heavy blanket, and the hum of the apartment feels louder than it should. I was craving something familiar, something that reminded me of simpler times when the world felt small and predictable. Nostalgia has a funny way of luring you in, doesn't it? It promises warmth, comfort, memories of laughter echoing through sunlit streets. I thought I was safe, scrolling through my old neighborhood, tracing the paths I ran as a child, imagining the scraped knees and cardboard forts that once defined my world. But as I moved the cursor down the familiar roads, the illusion of safety began to slip. The images on the screen were eerily still, frozen in a way that didn't match my memories. Shadows hung too long across the lawns, light bent strangely on windows, and the angle of the sun seemed off, almost deliberate. There was a silence in those digital streets, a stillness that pressed against me through the screen. It was as if the world I loved had been copied, pasted, and left to rot in some virtual graveyard. I clicked down familiar lanes, expecting comfort, expecting the familiar hum of my childhood home rendered in precise digital detail. But instead, I felt a creeping tension I couldn't shake. The streetlights flickered in the virtual world, the leaves on the trees frozen mid-sway, and the houses stood like silent sentinels, observing me. I tried to laugh it off. It's just Google Maps, nothing more. But the longer I stared, the more that quiet world began to feel alive. And then I saw it, a shadow where no one should have been. At first, I thought it was just a glitch, a pixel error, or a trick of the light. But glitches don't stare back. That figure, faint but unmistakable, was aware. And awareness, even through a screen, carries weight. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I felt it watching me as much as I was watching it. My curiosity, once innocent, had taken me somewhere dangerous. Somewhere that straddled the line between memory and nightmare, between the world I knew and the one I was only beginning to glimpse. I clicked closer, almost holding my breath, as the image on the screen sharpened. Every pixel seemed sharper, every shadow heavier, as if Google Maps had suddenly decided to stop being neutral and start being sinister. And there it was, the figure standing in my childhood yard. The closer I got, the more impossible it became. It wasn't just vaguely human. It had the exact same haircut I'd worn in 3rd grade, that messy mop of brown hair I thought I'd long since outgrown. The clothes, faded t-shirt, shorts, scuffed sneakers, matched what I remembered wearing the day I got my first bike. My heart skipped, then raced. I leaned in further, eyes straining at the unnatural clarity of the image. The figure wasn't moving, not at first. Just standing there, hands at its sides, weight shifted slightly forward, head tilted as though it was listening. I blinked, convinced that when I opened them again it would disappear. But it didn't. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I found myself murmuring to no one, "If this were a creepypasta, I'd call it fake. Too bad it was my life." There was no one else in the yard, no parent or sibling or neighbor. Just this, me. But not me. I noticed the small details, the way the shadow fell across the front porch, the flicker of sunlight glinting off the window beside the figure. And then, impossibly, something else caught my eye. A reflection. A faint shape, moving slowly across the glass, almost blending into the scene but undeniably present. My gut told me to zoom in, to see it clearly, but something instinctively stopped me. Call it fear, call it instinct. Some part of me knew that curiosity might cross a line from which there was no return. The figure's gaze felt like it had depth, like it was peering through the screen, through time, directly into my own eyes. And for the first time that night, I realized with bone-deep certainty that whatever I was looking at wasn't just a memory. It was something alive, waiting, and aware of me. I leaned back in my chair, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My logical mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe it was an old photograph someone had accidentally left embedded in Street View, a glitch in the mapping software, or some elaborate prank. Anything plausible, anything that would allow me to ignore the growing unease coiling in my chest. I even muttered aloud, "It's probably nothing, just a coincidence, just pixels." But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. No coincidence could replicate me at that age, standing in the exact pose I remembered, down to the tilt of my head and the scuff on my right sneaker. I grabbed my phone and texted my friend, the one I knew would humor me without judgment. "Dude, I know this sounds insane, but I think I just saw myself on Google Maps." A few seconds later, the reply buzzed in, "LOL, bro, it's just old data. Street View glitches all the time. Chill." I tried to laugh it off, but the laugh caught in my throat. Not satisfied, I posted a screenshot in a small forum dedicated to urban legends and internet oddities. I described everything in detail, the exact location, the figure, the reflection in the window, the uncanny stillness. The responses trickled in, mostly dismissive. "Just a glitch. Nothing to see here." One or two, however, hinted at things they'd noticed themselves, strange movements in old Street View images, shadows that didn't belong. But even those messages couldn't quell the knot of fear twisting in my stomach. I leaned back again, staring at the screen, trying to rationalize, trying to convince myself that curiosity hadn't led me somewhere unsafe. I repeated the mantra silently, "It's nothing, it's nothing, it's nothing." But the figure remained, impossible and unblinking, and the stillness of the digital street pressed against me like a cold weight. And then I clicked the next arrow, and he moved. I couldn't tear my eyes away. I clicked forward, frame by frame, almost mechanically, as though the mouse had a life of its own. And then it happened, the figure shifted. Just slightly at first, a subtle movement that could have been dismissed as a glitch. But no. The way the shadows stretched across the lawn, the way the tiny shoulders swayed ever so slightly, it was unmistakable. My childhood self had moved. My fingers froze over the mouse, a cold shiver running down my spine. I wanted to close the tab, to shut my eyes, to pretend this hadn't happened. But the pull of curiosity was stronger than fear. I should have stopped there. But stopping felt worse than knowing. It was as if every click of the mouse drew me deeper into something I had no business discovering. With each frame, the child edged closer to the sidewalk, closer to the point where the street should have ended. The trees that had once been perfectly aligned in the digital rendering now seemed skewed, leaning in unnatural angles as if they, too, were watching. I could see the tiny details, the creases in the shorts, the fraying of the sneakers, the way the hair fell over the forehead. It was as precise as reality, yet wholly impossible. Then the child turned. Slowly, deliberately, that tilt of the head, the subtle shift in weight, and then the eyes, they locked onto the camera. Directly at me. It wasn't just a figure on a screen anymore. It was awareness, recognition, and the terror hit me in waves. I wanted to scream, but my apartment was silent, empty, and somehow, it felt like the figure knew that. My chest tightened as though it could squeeze the breath from me through the glass. I kept clicking, forward, frame after frame, and with every press, the figure crept closer, closer to the edge of the frame, closer to reality. My heart pounded in my ears, and my hands shook. The street itself began to feel alive, the asphalt stretching unnaturally, the lawns shifting subtly, shadows lengthening in ways that defied logic. It was a place I had known intimately, a place that should have been safe in memory, but now it felt like a trap, a corridor leading nowhere good. I glanced away for a fraction of a second and then back, because that's all it took for the child to be closer still. Pixel by pixel, frame by frame, it was advancing, and every time it moved, I felt a small, icy tug at the back of my mind, a whisper that I wasn't supposed to witness this. But I couldn't stop. Something inside me demanded answers, demanded to see how far this went, even as my rational mind screamed at me to close everything, unplug, escape. I'd read about haunted images before. Stories of strange figures appearing in photographs, glitching shadows in street view, odd reflections that vanished when you tried to get a closer look. But this felt worse. Those were stories you could dismiss as coincidence, clever Photoshop, or overactive imaginations. What I was seeing wasn't a rumor or a tale someone posted online. It was happening to me. Pixel by pixel, frame by frame, I realized that the rules of reality were bending in ways I couldn't explain. The child was no longer confined to my old street. With a few more clicks, I found him, or rather me, on streets that should have been miles away. Suburban neighborhoods I had never lived in, parks I had never visited, even the commercial strip near the city's outskirts. And yet, the figure moved with the same awareness, the same deliberate intent, as if it could navigate the digital world on its own. I tried to rationalize it. Duplicated imagery, some mapping error, maybe even a clever Easter egg left by someone on Google's end. But rationality slipped further with each new frame. The distortion was subtle at first. Houses that should have aligned perfectly skewed at impossible angles. Trees leaned unnaturally, their leaves frozen mid-fall, flickering between frames. Streetlights bent as though pulled by some unseen gravity. And then the glitches became more obvious. Colors shifting, pixels stretching and compressing unnaturally, reflections in windows hinting at shapes I didn't want to name aloud. It wasn't just a map anymore. It was a stage, a corrupted mirror reflecting something I wasn't supposed to witness. I kept talking to myself, trying to impose logic on the chaos. It's just a bug. It's just a bug. Nothing more. But I knew it was lying. The child's movements weren't random. They weren't accidental. It seemed aware of me as much as I was of it. And the deeper I went, the more I felt the unnerving sensation that something beyond the screen was leaning in, watching, waiting. If you've seen anything like this, tell me in the comments. I need to know I'm not alone. I needed proof that this wasn't a hallucination born of insomnia and obsession. But posting, explaining, rationalizing, it all felt futile. No one could prepare me for what was coming next. The contrast between the normalcy of a typical street and the corruption that now unfolded before me couldn't have been starker. Where I expected comfort, I found unease. Where I expected familiar roads, I found impossible geometry. The figure of my childhood self, my exact self, had become a constant, unavoidable presence, appearing in spaces it had no right to occupy. And as I hovered over the next arrow, I realized that the more I observed, the more the rules bent around me. The streets twisted, the houses distorted, and the child moved closer to something I couldn't name, to something I feared I might become. The ordinary world, the safe world, was slipping away, replaced by a nightmare constructed entirely from pixels, shadows, and memory. As I clicked through the warped streets, a memory surfaced that I had buried long ago. It was a fragment, sharp and jagged, like glass hidden under a rug. I was 8 years old, standing in the very same yard, feeling the same weight of something unspoken pressing down on me. I couldn't remember the exact details, only the sense of fear, isolation, and the echo of a voice, soft, angry, urgent, that I couldn't place. The image on the screen seemed to draw it all back, each frame dragging me deeper into a past I had thought I had escaped. The child on the screen wasn't just a version of me. It was a reminder, a tether to something unresolved, something that had shadowed me throughout my life. My chest tightened as I realized the connection. This figure wasn't just a memory. I hadn't left it behind. It had waited, patient and aware, in some corner of the world I could never reach until tonight. Every movement it made, every subtle shift, felt loaded with intention. I could almost hear the echoes of voices from my childhood overlapping with the present. Stay inside. Don't tell anyone. The murmurs, once comforting in their warning, now twisted into something sinister. My own laughter from years ago mingled with it, as if the digital child had somehow captured the full essence of my past, mocking me. The memories weren't clear. They were shards, but they were enough to make my skin crawl, to make the hairs on my neck stand on end. I whispered aloud to myself, trying to rationalize. It's just me, just a reflection, just pixels. But rationality slipped further with each frame. The figure moved independently, aware of the camera, aware of me, as though it carried the weight of every unspoken trauma, every moment I had tried to forget. It wasn't playful. It wasn't innocent. There was intelligence in the stance, in the gaze, in the deliberate tilt of the head. And then, as I leaned closer, my stomach dropping, I realized something horrifying. The face, my childhood face, wasn't quite right anymore. The eyes seemed deeper, darker, and the expression carried a weight I didn't recognize. It was me, but it wasn't me. There was something foreign behind that innocent mask, something patient, something waiting. I wanted to look away, to escape back into the safety of my apartment, but my hands were frozen. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I whispered, almost pleadingly, "It's not real. It can't be real." But the digital child didn't flinch. Instead, it shifted slightly, just enough to make me realize that it had seen me noticing the difference. The small nuances, the tilt of the mouth, the intensity in the eyes, the subtle flare of the nostrils, spoke of awareness, of memory, of something that had survived and adapted. Every instinct screamed at me to shut the computer, to erase the history, to run, but a morbid curiosity rooted me in place. This wasn't just a childhood memory. This was a living, breathing fragment of something I had never escaped. It was waiting for acknowledgement, for recognition, for confrontation. And in that instant, I froze, staring at the screen, because I realized the truth. The child I had been wasn't just a shadow of the past. The figure's face, twisted ever so slightly, hinted at something else entirely. Something older, something patient, something that had learned from me, and perhaps had been waiting all this time for me to notice. My hands were shaking, but I couldn't stop. The screen blurred in certain frames, particularly around the windows of houses that should have been mundane, pixelated, ordinary. But one window caught my attention. The glass hazy, a smear of digital distortion, as if Google Maps itself was resisting me seeing what lay beyond. And yet I had to look. Curiosity, that same morbid pull that had brought me here, would not let me turn away. I zoomed in, slowly, painfully. The pixels stretched and coalesced into shapes, And then, impossibly, I saw it. Myself. Sitting at my desk. My apartment. The same lamp, the same clutter, the same cold coffee beside me. And there I was, staring back at the screen, scrolling through Google Maps, watching the child in the yard. My own reflection caught in the digital glass, recursive and impossible. A viewer watching a memory that wasn't meant to be seen like this. My stomach dropped. I thought I understood recursion before in code snippets or philosophical musings, but this was different. This was alive. Every blink, every twitch of my hand was captured and displayed, mirrored, and yet distorted. And the child, my past self, stood frozen, aware, staring directly at the window as if it, too, could see me now, as if it understood my place in the chain. I wanted to close the tab, smash the mouse, run to the hallway screaming, anything to break the loop, but the images held me in place. I whispered aloud. I thought if I clicked one more frame, I'd see the end. Instead, I saw the beginning. The horror wasn't just that I could see myself. It was that the world I trusted, the digital map that should have been inert, was now a mirror of my own obsession, reflecting my paranoia, my curiosity, my terror infinitely. Each frame was a trap, each zoom a doorway, and I was stepping through willingly, powerless to resist. Time felt fractured. The street outside my old house twisted impossibly, looping in ways that made no sense. Trees leaned, fences warped. The sun hung in angles that contradicted itself. And at the center of it, the child, my younger self, remained both observer and observed, frozen and yet alive, aware and yet unreadable. And there I was, in the reflection of the digital window, trapped inside the same recursive nightmare, a ghost watching a ghost. I tried to rationalize again, muttering to myself, it's just a trick of light, a glitch, just pixels. But the truth pressed in like a physical weight. My apartment smelled stale, the lamp's light too bright, too cold. I could hear the faint hum of the computer as though it was whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear. My hands hovered over the mouse, trembling, but I clicked one more frame. And then I heard it, a knock. Soft at first, almost tentative, yet somehow deliberate. My heart stuttered in my chest. The screen reflected my wide-eyed stare, the blurred digital world behind it, and the child in the yard. But now, that knock, that tangible real-world sound, made the impossible feel urgent. I froze, the mouse hovering over the next frame, caught between curiosity and survival. My mind screamed that I should ignore it, that it was probably the wind, a neighbor, anything normal. But the fear was immediate, pure, undeniable. I couldn't move. Not yet. Not until I knew what the next frame held. The recursive images, the warped streets, the aware child, they were all waiting. And that knock, it wasn't just a sound. It was a warning. The knock came again. Slow, deliberate, and perfectly timed, as if it had been waiting for me to reach that frame. I froze, my hand hovering over the mouse, every nerve ending alight with dread. The sound echoed through my apartment, bouncing off the walls that had always felt safe, familiar, normal. But normal had left long ago. Now, every creak, every whisper of air felt like a warning, a prelude to something I wasn't ready to face. Another knock, harder this time, synchronized with the next frame I had just clicked. My stomach turned as I realized the impossible. Each movement of my childhood self on Street View seemed mirrored by the sounds in my own apartment. My pulse raced. I wanted to tell myself it was a coincidence, the building settling, the neighbors acting strangely. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Then came the voice. Soft, high-pitched, unmistakable. Hey, it's me. Called my name. But not my voice. A child's. My voice, from years ago, warped into something that made my stomach sink and my blood run cold. I could feel the hair on my arms stand on end, the silence of the room amplifying every syllable. It wasn't a recording. It wasn't someone imitating me. It was that impossible awareness, that presence I had been following through Street View, now speaking directly into my reality. I staggered back from the desk, my eyes locked on the screen, the digital child staring back with impossible intent. My apartment locked, familiar, mundane, suddenly felt violated. The safe barriers of doors and walls meant nothing. The voice outside, high and eerily familiar, contradicted everything I knew about the world, everything I thought was possible. My rational mind scrambled for an explanation, any explanation, but it refused to come. I shouldn't tell you what happened next, but if I vanish, someone needs to know. My voice trembled as I whispered it into the empty room, as if saying it aloud might anchor me to reality. But even as the words left my mouth, the knock continued, slow, deliberate, echoing, paired with the clicks of my mouse as I tried, desperately, to track the figure on the screen. The line between digital and real was dissolving, and I felt powerless to stop it. Each time I clicked forward, the child in Street View mirrored the knock in some impossible way. The frame shifted, a shadow leaning closer, an angle tilting as though aware of me watching. And outside, the voice repeated my name, soft, patient, demanding recognition. My safe apartment had become a stage for the impossible, a theater where the rules of the world were suspended and only the figure of my childhood self held sway. The contrast was unbearable. Inside, I was locked in, supposedly secure, surrounded by walls I had trusted for decades. Outside, a small voice, impossibly familiar and impossibly wrong, called to me from a place I knew I should never reach. I wanted to scream, to run, to unplug, to escape the glowing rectangle that had become a doorway. But I couldn't. I was trapped in a dance with something I couldn't name, something that knew me better than I knew myself. The knocking paused briefly, and I dared a breath. The silence was heavier than the sound had been, pregnant with anticipation. I knew it would start again. It always did. And when it did, I would be ready, or maybe I wouldn't. I didn't know if anyone could ever truly be ready for this. I stumbled backward from the desk, my fingers trembling over the mouse. The knocks had stopped, or maybe they had merged with the hum of the computer, the buzzing of the apartment lights, the thrum of my own heartbeat. My eyes darted to the window, half expecting to see that small, impossible figure standing in the yard, watching me as it had through every frame. I knew I shouldn't look, knew I should close everything and pretend none of this had ever happened. But something compelled me forward. I walked to the window and the world fractured. A sudden flicker of static, pixels stretching unnaturally, the street outside bending and looping like a corrupted video file. The figure was gone from the yard, replaced by glimpses of streets I didn't recognize, streets I'd never visited, yet somehow familiar, somehow mine. My breath caught. I realized then that this wasn't a one-time anomaly. The child, the reflection, the recursive nightmare. I had opened a door I couldn't close. Desperate for any sense of control, I grabbed my laptop and typed out everything that had happened. Every click, every frame, every impossible movement. I uploaded it to a forum, to a blog, to anywhere that might warn anyone that curiosity could lead to more than memories. But as I hit publish, a cold realization crawled over me like ice through my veins. The words on the screen weren't mine alone anymore. Someone or something was reading, watching, maybe even typing along. The final sentence I managed to write hovered on the page. If you ever search your old street on Google Maps, don't click forward. You might see me. And I knew, deep down, that the me in that warning wasn't just a voice from my past. It was something that had learned to exist outside the frames, outside the memories, outside my control. Somewhere, in the endless streets of pixels and shadows, the child was patient, waiting for the next person curious enough to click, waiting for someone who wouldn't be able to look away. I should have stopped there, but I didn't. And now, as you read this, you might realize that I'm not the only one. That the story, the screens, the reflections, they continue. The horror never truly ends. Every click, every zoom, every search could awaken it again. My narrative, my warning, might be nothing more than a lure, a doorway. So if you ever decide to revisit your old street, to chase memories in digital light, remember this. The child is always there, watching, waiting, patient. And sometimes, if you're unlucky, it might just see you before you see it. The line between memory and presence has blurred. And just like that, the endless street stretches out again, waiting for the next click, the next viewer.